Hello, bonjour, and greetings, and welcome to the unofficial PopCap PopCast, a podcast about the golden age of PopCap games by two guys who were there at the time. I'm Steve Notley.
And I'm Isaac Aubry, and we want to make sure everyone's aware that we do not represent PopCap or EA or PopCap under EA or anything like that. We're just these folks that worked their way back when, telling stories and talking about video games and what got us into them and what we've been doing since all that stuff went down. And today we have an awesome guest. Usually I say a very special guest, but I realize I say that every single time because every guest is very special. But today we have an extra special, very special guest, Ed Allard, who, well, we first came in contact with him as one of the founders of Sprout Games. PopCap and Sprout formed a union back in, I think it was 2005 when
That sounds
PopCap
right to me, but I think we'll get into the timeline more
in a
in
minute
more
here.
clarity.
And so spent all those glory years at PopCap with us, doing all the wild things and making video games, and also lived through the experience of EA buying out PopCap and has done a lot of cool stuff since then. So we're going to dig into that. Hi, Ed. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hey guys, it's super awesome to be here.
All
Awesome to
right.
see some faces from back in the day.
Way back when.
Well, so now I heard that what sort of premised you showing up on our show is that you ran into Isaac at the show that he was putting on like last week or the week before,
Yep,
and
yep.
he had pitched the idea of you being on and you agreeing. So does by that, therefore, I conclude that you are familiar with the show. Have you listened to any episodes or anything?
I've listened to a few. I only found out about it actually at the show, which
Ah,
was, I don't know, a week or so ago. So I haven't gotten to listen to all of them, but I listened to a few.
all
Cool.
right.
Cool.
I was able to hear the sordid history of Pig Up.
So, well, a history in which you may have heard your name dropped a couple of times. So, like, it'll be interesting.
I was there. I was there.
Yeah, so we did a whole episode about it, so we're probably not going to spend a ton of time getting into that this time around. But I'm sure at some point in this list of questions, we'll bump up
Yeah.
and get a little bit more detail on all that business.
Uh, we ask a lot of folks this, but I think this is going to be some interesting answers this time around. And that is, Ed, when did you first get into video games and what got you excited about games? You're a little older like us, so I have a feeling it might be a similar story, but I'm very curious about your entry point.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a time when getting into games, there wasn't a path. You just had to make one. And so what got me into video games actually goes all the way back to elementary school. I think it was 1984, the original Tron.
Oh,
I
super good.
saw it in theaters as a kid. And, yeah, Tron had elements of video games as part of the plot. But to me, it was like computers can make worlds that don't exist. Sign me up. Like,
Totally.
how do you do that? Like, I understood what a computer was. I saw Tron and I didn't understand. I understood there was a connection, but I wanted to know how. And that sort of started me on my journey of learning basic on my TRS-80 color computer and typing in programs that would, once you turned off the computer, they would go away and saving things onto cassette and just becoming a super nerdy hacker type. Because ultimately, I just wanted to make worlds like those guys who did it in Tron.
Even though they
Totally.
don't have the ability to actually truly enter those worlds as a result of being taken apart atom by atom by a laser and then recreated in some kind of fanciful computer world.
That brings up an interesting point about that movie though, because we'd never seen anything like that before. And it was very computery. Like when a kid in the 80s, when you think of computers, like just the look of that movie was what came to mind. And yeah, it
Well,
was just this next level.
it does make me want to ask. I guess it's probably easy to find out, but like whether Neuromancer by William Gibson had been written before Tron came out, right? Because I think Neuromancer is the book that is kind of believed to have sort of started the idea of cyberspace as this world that one would enter. So I don't know if Tron influenced Neuromancer or if Neuromancer influenced Tron. I guess it
I
doesn't
think
matter ultimately.
Neuromancer preceded Tron. I think Neuromancer came
I would
first.
I would guess so, just because almost in all cases, books tend to come up with ideas before movies do.
Yeah, everything's informed by something prior for sure. That's interesting though. Good tidbit for folks. So you mentioned your computer that you first started working on. Would you say a TR?
TRS-80 color computer.
Cool.
Nice.
God, I've forgotten about that. That like rings a distant bell, but
Radio Shack Special.
there you go. There you
So
go.
was that like an entire unit all in one, where it's like keyboard, monitor, everything was just one thing, or
Yeah, so TRS-80 had some black and white computers that were like that, just all one thing. And then they had the TRS-80, and because it was color, the monitor needed to be a color monitor. So what you did is you bought just the computer and you plugged it into a TV. Right. And my memory is that you plugged it in, with the same little modulator thing that you plug in, like you'd plug in an Atari 2600.
with the little Y clips on the end of the box that you would have to switch that said TV game on it? I
Yeah.
mean, like,
So staring
yeah.
at text on a CRT television like that is probably why I'm wearing glasses.
Yeah, it's just a fuzzy mess. You kind of make some characters out. Now that was with that probably would have been what, like 83 or something like that, TRS
Yeah, it was
2?
mid to late 80s.
Oh,
This
late
is a
80s.
hand-me-down. My brother had it and he moved on to an Apple II, I think, Apple One, Apple II. And then I was like, okay, yes, I like give me that computer. And I would just lock myself in the room and try to make cool stuff. And the
That's
only way you can make pictures at the time, like there's no Photoshop. The only way
mhm.
you can make pictures was programming. So if you wanted to draw a circle, you had to write code to draw a circle. If you wanted to draw a square, you wrote code to draw a square. If you wanted to move, you had to write code to make the square move. And so just learning it from sort of the inside out, and in retrospect, it's just ridiculous to imagine writing
But
anything like that these days.
what a great perspective though, because it really gives you an appreciation for where things are at now. And then if anything goes awry or you see, it probably gives you a little insight into some really obscure bugs that can happen. What did you move on to from that? Did you finally get an Apple, like Jay did, or what? How did
No, so that was my computer up through starting high school. And then somewhere middle of high school, I ended up with an Amiga
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
and ended up not doing a lot of coding on the Amiga, weirdly. Like that was there was it was it there were so many cool tools. So I started getting into mod tracking and Paint Shop Pro, like those kinds of apps, all kinds of pirated software.
Yeah,
'Cause-
yeah.
My memory of the Amiga is just that at the time it was close to
But
sort of like the highest end gaming machine that you could have in your home. It would have been way higher than, say, like a Nintendo, an NES or any of the previous generation, like the ColecoVision or the Atari or the Intellivision. So if you had something like an Amiga, which I guess was after the VIC-20 and after the Commodore 64, the
yeah,
Amiga was like next from Commodore. That was the highest level of video gaming that you were going to be able to access in your own home.
yeah,
Thing.
it was mind blowing. And you could plug in, it had ports to plug in 2600 joysticks. So you could plug in your Atari joystick and play all the games. But yeah, the games on that were amazing. And a cool thing about the Amiga is there's also this demo scene where people would
Right.
just do really cool, and the demo
Just like
scene's still
wild,
around.
crazy music, like electronic music tracks, and sort of like spheres turning into pyramids and back and forth and all that kind of craziness. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so then I went off to college and ended up with a computer science degree. My first gig out of school was weirdly, it was kind of like the closest I could find to making video games without making video games. Back at Silicon Graphics. So my first gig out of school was at Silicon Graphics, which uh, I mean, literally, it was the days of the dinosaurs because it was around the time when the first Jurassic Park movie came out. And Silicon Graphics created the workstations that powered the creation of the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. And
oh,
that's
that's
sort of the
huge.
big claim to fame. I mean, weirdly, it's funny that my career started there because now I'm like, yeah, it started with the dinosaurs, and that makes me feel old.
And now we are the dinosaurs. But
Indeed.
yeah, the
But it
computer
was
to run something stuff like that, was it? I mean, that was back when it was even like sizable. Like that must have been a huge, huge
Well, and a
setup
Silicon
for you.
graphics machine would have been like a fairly expensive piece of hardware at that time, wouldn't it? Like,
Yeah, I worked on their entry level machines, which were in the ten to $15,000 range. And like Jurassic Park was made on the high end, which at the time would have been you could easily spend $500,000 on a workstation for
oof.
We're
um
making some kind of hokey looking dinosaurs, but it worked.
exactly.
But
But
they weren't hokey looking. They look great. They
They look,
still look
they were
great.
awesome.
And so, but that job was, I was on a demo team. And so our job was to take new hardware as it came out and create the demos that were shown at trade shows and shipped on the machines to show off the capabilities of the machines. And so it's kind of this weird mix where we had artists, engineers, sound guy, kind of a weird eclectic mix of multidisciplinary people who were just trying to figure out how to do cool stuff with hardware that barely worked.
And so
Wow,
you,
wow.
so I just want to make sure I understand this. You were like an employee of Silicon Graphics on their demo team,
Yes,
selling their machines. Okay, got it.
yep, for three and a half years,
Wow.
I was doing demos for Silicon Graphics, and it was really, really cool. And the culture of that team is the closest I could come to thinking about something that reflected like the culture of PopCap.
Oh,
Hmm.
The
cool, cool.
my boss Howard Look there, he went on to be the software lead for TiVo. And he like best manager I've ever had to this date. Really, really amazing guy. And he just fostered this culture of valuing multidisciplinary skills and getting at, his job was to push things out of the way so that the people who were making the stuff could make the stuff. Really, really amazing guy. And, probably influenced the rest of my
Well,
trajectory.
then that to me seems like the most important job of a manager. And unfortunately, I've encountered many managers that don't seem to see it that way. But it seems like they're the people who are doing the work, and the manager's job is to make sure that the people who are doing the work have what they need to do the work. It's akin to being an officer in the military. Like you give the orders, but it's also you have responsibility to your men to make sure that they are supplied and provisioned and all the rest of it. And you're a better officer if you're spending more time making sure that the people who answer to you, who are below you, have what they need than if you spend it sucking up to the officers above you. And to me,
And
it just seems like that's such an elementary aspect of management, and yet it seems like kind of a minority opinion.
yeah, and they kind of call it managing down versus managing up. And I will openly admit that for my entire career, when I've been in a management role, managing up is something I've struggled with and hate. It's a necessary part of the job for me, but it's not what I love. And I've seen so many other people who are in those roles who thrive on that part.
See, that
Um,
to me makes no sense at all because, like, if I have to manage upward, in other words, manage my manager, that to me just says that my manager is not doing their job properly. It shouldn't be my job to take on your responsibility.
well, I think what
Like,
happens is if you just think about video games and the reward loop, as a manager, your reward comes from your manager. And so, like, if you're looking for positive reinforcement, that's where you get it is up, not down. Your
Mhm.
team is going to complain to you about all the stuff they don't have, and your manager is going to say good job or bad job. And so, like, I think it's actually kind of a natural thing to look for the good job. And it's rare, I think, that the team says, "Oh, manager, thanks, you're a great manager." It's like, no, really, manager's there to be a support staff, but like that's not where you get your positive reinforcement for the most part. Is like if you're looking for that, I think you look up. That's my best theory on it,
no,
but
that
Yeah,
does
yeah.
make some sense. Yeah.
still not my jam.
Yeah, yeah, it's fun making stuff, and that's kind of what we celebrate mostly in this podcast because it's one thing about PopCap. It pulled together so many just brilliant creators, and that's really the fun stuff.
Yep.
And speaking of creating cool stuff, and speaking of the guy who started TiVo, is that where how you got pulled into TiVo? I'm guessing it is. You left.
It is. I was just on the crux. I had just left Silicon Graphics to move to a new gig at Liquid Audio, which was an early .com audio streaming service. And like in the 4 weeks break between those two, Howard happened to call and said, "Hey, Ed, what are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I'm just about to start a new job." He's like, "Hey, you want to do some sound design?" And so, just out of the blue, because I'd done some sound design work as part of my multidisciplinary, everybody does everything kind of group. He thought of me. He gave me a call, and he's like, "Hey, we've got this TiVo thing, and we'd love for you to do some sounds for it. You want to try it out?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." I'm like, getting paid to make sounds cool.
So and in
Next thing you
this
know, it's like 25, 30 years later, and there's people making documentaries about the sounds you made in TiVo, right?
Yeah.
well, because I mean, Matt in one of our previous podcasts, I think he had been sort of talking about some of this stuff that you'd been doing, and it was literally like the sound that a TiVo makes when you do this, or like press record, or turn it off, or turn it on, or like those sort of haptic sounds. Those are the sounds that you were responsible for creating.
Yeah. And at the time it seemed really functional, but like I sort of there wasn't this notion of there's this word out there, sonic branding. And like the idea of sonic branding wasn't a thing. Like the Nokia ringtone didn't really exist yet. So these iconic sounds that you associated with brands wasn't really a thing. So it wasn't my goal. But then like I called customer support because TiVo didn't give me a TiVo. I had to buy a TiVo after I did the sounds so I could hear my sounds on the thing that they shipped. So I called customer support because I needed to, I needed support for my TiVo. And like the phone tree, when they say press three or whatever, the whole phone tree played my sounds as part of the interface. And so you push three and it'd be like, bing. I'm like, whoa,
Wow.
what did I
What?
do?
I mean, I guess in a sense, it's like prior to the digital industry, things just made the sounds they made. I mean, if you made and sold lawnmowers, you're not customizing the sound that the lawnmower makes
Yeah.
when it mows your lawn. It just makes whatever sound it makes. But here it's like, no, we actually have to think about artificial sounds that indicate, that give feedback to users and stuff like that. And so, as you say, it does sort of start to create, whether or not intentionally, a brand identity, right? Like you go, oh, or like just like the everybody knows the the little and the windows
There's so
on.
much of that. Like you've
Yeah.
got mail and like and whatever the Winamp sound used to be, something about llamas or whatever. There's just tons of them from
Winamp
that time period that
really
are just
whips the llama's ass.
yeah, exactly.
Sorry, that's just it's ingrained.
It's funny how important that stuff was. And it could even be just some pretty lo-fi sounds in some cases, but they were just iconic in a weird way. And now that we've got, we're on to Windows 11 and we've heard like the Windows sign-in sound change every iteration where it just doesn't mean anything anymore. It's just this blah, blah, blah thing that happens and it just flies by it's a different landscape. But yeah, that stuff was really important back then. I mean, to the degree, like, and I just lightly touched on this a bit ago, but there's literally a documentary about the TiVo, right? And we should probably point people in that direction to get all the details on it. But and they interviewed you for that. When is that out yet?
So there's somebody who's working on a documentary, and she's kind of doing some early news stories leading up to it. I don't know that it released. Like every once in a while, some TiVo thing just kind of drops in
Hey Ed,
my
remember
mailbox, and
this?
yeah, sure, that was a weird little gig, and it was fun.
Oh, I
But
love it. Well, yeah, for our listeners out there, keep your eye out for a TiVo documentary because it's going to be a good one. I have no doubt.
yeah, I
Um,
mean, and TiVo, I know a bunch of the guys who were at TiVo. A lot of them actually came from Silicon Graphics. And if you put TiVo and PopCap next to each other in terms of uh, culture and sort of the craziness that happened, there's probably a lot less alcohol going on at TiVo. But other than that, like they were kindred spirits for sure. It was kind of fun to watch that grow into existence.
Well,
that's so
we
cool.
just spent a couple of episodes going into great depth about the alcohol culture at PopCap and the Two Bells.
It
So
wasn't so healthy, man.
Yeah, that's true, and I think that's a good perspective, which we I'm not sure that we really called that out so much in our episode before because it was a way that we communicated and it added a lot to the culture of it. But in some cases, I think it was a bit much for some folks.
yeah, we didn't put on a little thing going like, okay, kids, don't do blackout drinking every night and every weeknight. If you want to keep your jobs, I mean, maybe we sensationalize it, but I don't know if kids are really paying attention to this podcast, but maybe some are. I mean, that's one of the reason we started this whole thing in the first place was because we had this sense that there's this whole generation of younger people who are like super into PopCap games, PVZ especially, But even just like outside the PVZ nucleus, there's like a lot of kids who would have been essentially not even born when we were making a lot of these games that apparently now are discovering them and into them.
Yeah, yeah. It warmed my heart when I came home one day and I saw my teenage son sitting on the couch with like three friends, and they were just kicking back to Peggle.
There you
And
You're
go.
like, what?
I'm like, man, I haven't seen that game in way too many years. Hand me the controller.
Yeah, that is awesome. So, what was the path between TiVo and Sprout? At some point, you're like, I want to make games.
Yeah, so I was at Liquid Audio for a little while, but at the same time, I was in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. I was trying to cook up a video game studio because this is where I always wanted to end up with a bunch of my friends in the Bay Area. It's a little bit like trying to get a Dungeons and Dragons group together. Like one person has to be the anchor and just like
Right.
drag everybody else along and say, "Hey, are you going to show up tonight?" And people flaked and that sort of thing. And I was sort of that guy, or getting a band together, right? Like somebody has to sort of
The
be the
leader.
anchor and say
Yeah.
rehearsal this day, and then where the hell's the guitarist? So we were in the sort of formative stages of trying to create something. We were cooking up some ideas, trying to figure out how a company would work. But it was really, really hard. Like it was just hard to get that formation over the hump. But my brother, who at the time was working at Microsoft and had recently started in on Xbox, said, "Hey, I know this guy at Microsoft who's really interested in video games and he's thinking about leaving his job to do video games. You should talk." And this guy is James Gwertzman. And so James was living in Japan at the time because, of course, he flew to Seattle and he and I met at my brother's house. And my brother's just like, "Hey, you guys like are thinking the same stuff. You should talk." So I flew up to Seattle. He flew in from Japan. We hung out on the floor of my brother's house with a bunch of 3x5 index cards and talked about what a video game company would look like. And
Huh.
we just gelled immediately. We were like, "Hey, like let's talk about culture. Like what's this gonna feel like?" We talked about, storytelling versus gameplay, and we kind of cooked up all these ideas knowing zero, absolutely zero. And then it was probably a few months after that we decided, hey, let's attend GDC, which is the Game Developer Conference. And that was in at the time, GDC was not this giant event in the Yerba Buena Center, wherever it is in San Francisco. It was a little hotel in San Jose, and it was very, very developer focused. And so we went to all these sessions, we met all these people, and the game industry is small enough that you can meet people like Jason Rubins from Naughty Dog. You can meet people who were, really making the stuff, Tim Schafer. And so we talked to lots of people and we looked at each other and we're like, this is absolutely crazy. It's hard. It's already getting super crowded. Do we want to do this? And we looked at each other and we're like, we're going to regret it if we don't say yes. So we both quit our jobs and started a game company. We moved to Seattle. We both moved to Seattle and started a game company in the year 2000. And that game company was called Escape Factory.
Oh,
It
right,
wasn't
right.
Sprout Games. So Escape Factory was we were going to work on console games. We were gonna release an Xbox game, kind of along with not necessarily a launch title, but early Xbox games. And there we could do hours on the rise and fall of Escape Factory. James has actually given presentations on Escape Factory and sort of its history, so we don't necessarily have to go there. But ultimately, the end of that story is we got a publishing deal. We got about $1 million into a $3 million budget. The day before Christmas, our publisher canceled the game, and we had a team of 30 people looking for payroll.
Wow. Holy smokes. So
So,
real quick, so now was Joe a part of this at this point yet, or we're getting to him?
yep, Joe Mobley was
Okay.
one of the team. And so we were scrambling. We just needed to make payroll. We were, slowly laying people off. There were people, I mean, every single human who was at Escape Factory, my heart goes out to them because believed in the vision. A lot of them stuck around trying to help, even though we couldn't pay them. And we're like, no, no, like we will help you find jobs, but we can't pay you. And, they'd show up the next day and we're like, no, go home. Um, but as a survival tactic, we got some work for hire out of Wild Tangent Games, which is one of the early casual game developers. They had an ActiveX engine that they were making, kind of a precursor to Unity,
They had their web driver that,
and their
yeah,
web driver, yeah.
yeah.
And so they needed a bunch of content that showcased their web driver, and they gave us some money to create. And the task was go find an arcade game, uh, change it enough that it's not recognizably just a clone of that arcade game, but it basically is recognizably a clone of that arcade game, and give it to us for $30,000. And I'm like, okay, well, 30,000 is bigger than zero. Awesome. It still doesn't like for the team that we had, we had some world-class animators, we had AAA talent, and we're like, hey, could you go make a Spy Hunter ripoff? And and some of them were in, some of them weren't. And Joe Mobley was working on a game that was inspired by Marble Madness, called Overball, which I think it's a super delightful game. I went back. I think you could still run it. It's a Marble Madness, but you plant flowers. It's sort
Oh,
of this.
interesting.
It's this game
Huh.
where you go around rather than racing through. It's a little bit puzzly, and there are all these spots, and if you roll over these spots, then flowers pop up. And
Wow.
there's combos for planting flowers of the right colors and completing all, finding the little secret areas where you can find, places to plant flowers. But anyway, it's sort of a survival tactic, right? And but as we're doing this, we're like, what are these games? Like this doesn't feel like a game. What are these games? And we discovered casual games. And we're like, oh, like this is kind of a thing. So
Yeah. Yeah.
PopCap had done Bejeweled at that point. Real Networks was just launching Real Arcade at the time. There was Wild Tangent. Game House probably had Collapse out at that time.
Hmm.
And so we saw like, hey, we wanted to create mass appeal console games. Um, and wait, the mass appeal audience is actually playing these things. Like maybe the audience we were going for is somewhere that we didn't expect. And so we turned it into a business model and said, okay, handful of people who are left finishing up these web games for Wild Tangent. You guys in to create something,
Let's give us
to
some
double down
space.
on this as the strategy. And most of them either had found jobs because they needed paychecks, and no harm, no foul there. But there were actually four of us who said, "Yeah, let's do it." Um, and we kind of looked at it and we said, "But Escape Factory, we had all of this scaffolding around the Escape Factory that was really built around AAA. It was built around profit sharing and large teams, and we had management, not management levels, but like employee levels for salary setting and all this stuff. Like they kind of came from our backgrounds in tech. And I'm like, but this is a different thing. This is three guys in a garage. Like we should not pretend like we're coming back. So let's create something new. And that's where Sprout Games was created, was let's create something new. Let's make it Sprout Games. So Sprout Games was created out of Escape Factory. Three guys, and one of the guys, we couldn't kind of come to terms with how ownership was going to work in Sprout for the fourth guy. So it was just three of us. It is myself, James, and Joe Mobley. And we got to deal with Real Networks to do three casual games. They saw the work that we did. They said, hey, we'll give you some money. We'll give you an advance for three games. Go make us three games and we'll sell them. And we got some back end royalty.
In the past, and I think on one of the previous podcasts, like I'd always sort of viewed you guys as kind of like a mini PopCap but I guess what you're telling me sort of sounds like this structure of ownership and responsibility for Sprout kind of mirrors PopCap, but essentially by accident, in the sense that like with PopCap, you had Jason as your sort of creative director, Brian as your sort of technology director, and John, as I guess you'd call it, the business director. You could sort of map those roles onto Sprout and say, okay, you, Ed, were the creative director, Joe would have been tech, and James would have been business. So again, like a mini PopCap, but not directly inspired by that. It just happened to sort of roll out that way, is what I'm hearing.
It did. And we were a little bit more, I think all three of us were a little more multidisciplinary than the PopCap founders and
Right.
our interests. And so we organized a little bit differently. Of those three games, each of us basically took ownership of one of those games creatively and kind of technically.
Hmm.
So I started working on a game Feeding Frenzy, which was a big fish eats small fish, inspired by an old Intellivision game called Shark Shark.
Right.
Awesome.
James started working on a pizza delivery game called Pizza Frenzy. And what was the third game?
Color
No,
harmony?
no, no. It was Word
Word harmony?
Harmony.
Word harmony.
And so Joe did kind of fall into sort of the technical side of it a little bit more, where rather than doing as much game design, he was like, this was back in the day when we couldn't count on graphics cards being in computers. And
Mhm.
so, like, we wrote our own software rendering routines where every pixel was, rendered by software. And part of the reason for doing that is we wanted to reach the broadest audience possible. And I think our target was a Pentium 3 500 megahertz machine with no graphics card.
Smoking.
And so, a lot of the things that we did in the service of being able to to do that. So Joe wrote this cool engine that never ended up getting shipping anything besides a handful of Sprout games. But like the fish in Feeding Frenzy don't rotate because that was computationally too hard for our software renderer to handle for the lowest end target hardware. So we couldn't rotate pictures, and that's why all the fish
Right.
are
They
always like
swim
perfectly
backwards.
horizontal.
But they
Yeah.
they have an animation strip that allows them to change direction, right? To go
Yep.
from facing left to facing right.
And then, and part of those days while we were working on Feeding Frenzy and Pizza Frenzy, we got a knock on the door. One of the favorite days in the game industry. We got a knock on the door, and there's this dude who, oddest looking fella. He's like, and I'm like, hey, can we help you? And he's like, yeah, I hear you guys make games here. Oh, yeah. It's like, well, I'm an artist and I'm kind of wondering if I could do some work for you. Can I show you some of my stuff? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Just out of the pure, like, what the hell? Like, somebody just knocks on your door and says, we're at the time, we were literally renting a space that was like an extra office space inside of a SureGuard storage area in Seattle. Just on the other side of the exit door, they used to service all the U-Hauls, and so we got to like breathe all the diesel fumes from the U-Haul servicing. And this dude, like, how they he we did had no signage or anything. He somehow tracked us down. I should ask him how he found us. He knocked on the door. He's like, "I hear you make games. Can I show you my stuff?" And in walks Matt Holmberg. Like Matt is just a personality like nobody's you've ever met. And he walks in, and under his arm, he's got a box of Magi Nation cards, and they're still wrapped. So his portfolio wasn't, here's my, portfolio. His portfolio is while we're sitting there, he's opening imagination
Like
card packs, blind
like
packs,
market ready artwork.
looking
Like
through them and saying, I made that one. I made that one. Oh, my buddy Rich did this one. He's so good. And so like there actually was like a Rich pile where he started selling other artists he worked with as much as he was selling himself as this like cold call interview. And he's just like throwing these magic cards out. He's like, yeah, so that's what I do. And we're all just like, this is awesome. But like, what do we do with it? And so he left and we all looked at each other. First of all, like, what just happened? This dude cold walked in, just started like opening foil packs of cards and selling his buddy's art to us. But secondly, like, how do we work with this guy?
Yeah. This is
Because
the
we
energy we
had we
need.
had no money coming in. The advances for these things were tiny. We're basically not paying ourselves to finish these games. But we figured out a way to bring Matt in to work on these games. Um, Dramatically underpaid him. I feel awful about that to this day. Uh,
Sounds like you didn't have much of a choice, though.
It gave him some, some profit participation in the games. But he did all the backgrounds for Feeding Frenzy. He did all the artwork for Pizza Frenzy. He did some of the artwork for Iggle Pop. We had another Escape Factory artist who created the actual characters for Iggle Pop. But he did all like the storyboard, the story art for Iggle Pop. And luckily when we ended up at PopCap, we were able to say, hey, like he's not a founding member of Sprout, but like you got to talk to Matt.
Yeah.
Like seriously, you got to talk to Matt. This guy is somebody who belongs here. So we then Feeding Frenzy actually did pretty well. Feeding Frenzy ended up in the charts on Real Arcade. And we started getting some royalty checks where we could start saying, "Hey, like we made some money on this game. This is cool." It wasn't, let's go retire in style money, but it was positive instead of negative, which
It's
was
encouraging. Yeah.
for
It's
us.
crazy
And
to think, just to pause for a moment and think, like, because this is again kind of similar to the PopCap situation in those early days, where there was a time where I think Microsoft had offered to buy Bejeweled for like 50 grand or something, and they kind of said no, or they had made the offer and Microsoft said no, or something like that. And at that time, that would have seemed like a good deal. Fast forward, 10 years, and they're selling it for $750 million.
yeah, I like to imagine that we were smart, but no, we were just lucky.
But I mean, like, you were making money. I mean, that's the thing. If you could actually have money coming in any amount, that's better than many folks who play the game, right? So,
Yeah.
So how did you get in contact with Jason, Brian, and John then? Did they reach out to you or did you come knocking on PopCap's door? How did that union
So
happen?
James Gwertzman was sort of business guy. And James is a consummate extrovert. He is happy walking into a room and introducing himself. He is happy making connections. If he wants to know somebody, he just reaches out. Um, so we were in the middle of our next three games, which would end up being, I think Eagle Pop was one of the next three. Eagle Pop, Feeding Frenzy 2, and ultimately Talismania.
right.
So we had done a deal with Real Networks, who had published our first games for exclusive rights to publish our next three. And they were really kind of interesting about it because they're like, hey, we know how well Feeding Frenzy is doing, and you don't. We'll tell you after you do a deal for our next three games. So it was like they leveraged the fact that we didn't actually know how well their projections looked for our games to get exclusivity on the next three. That's kind of how I remember it. But anyway, we didn't want to attach ourselves to Real Networks forever, and we were kind of finding ourselves, kind of falling into a exclusive publisher kind of relationship, very similar to what Game House at the time was a close partner with Real Networks and then became part of Real Networks. So we were like, hey, we're getting in deeper and deeper with Real Networks, but maybe we should be more intentional about this. And so I believe Zuma had just come out from PopCap. I think that's the right timeline. And I remember us all sitting around playing Zuma and just be like, these guys are the masters. Like Zuma made a massive impression. Bejeweled, we got, it was good, but like when Zuma came out and we just played it, especially from our console game kind of roots, Zuma was a little bit more, you know, active, a little more
An
arcadey.
action game, yeah.
Yeah.
Everything was super, super snappy. The sound design was absolutely brilliant on that game. And we're just like, wow, we're not worthy. Zoom is amazing. Wish we could meet the guys who did this. And James is like, well, they're in Seattle. Let's just meet
Mhm.
them. And so set up a meeting, and we just had this somewhat awkward meeting where like, hey, we're Sprout Games. We did these games, and you guys did Zuma, and we just wanted to meet and say, hey, we're in Seattle, you're in Seattle. It was just sort of this awkward meet and greet. And then it turned into a callback and like, hey, would you guys want to be part of PopCap? Because we think like your DNA is really similar to our DNA, and it was a long time ago at this point, so exactly how that went down is a little bit fuzzy.
Right.
But I do remember very explicitly PopCap had made us an offer, and Big Fish Games also offered to
Huh.
acquire.
Oh,
So we were looking at two very, very attractive offers to sell the company. Big Fish Games offered us way more cash
Hmm.
than PopCap, and they offered us basically window offices looking out over Lake Union.
wow.
Because at the time they were in the sweet spot on Lake Union. And so we are like, oh man, Fourth and Battery in Belltown or like Lake Union. Uh, More cash or like, the company that we think we're more like. And so it was kind of this real interesting soul searching. And
Well, now I want to ask if and is like I've always sort of assumed, perhaps wrongly, that they bought you, right? But I've always sort of assumed that you guys then therefore ended up with at least some small amount of ownership. Did that happen or no?
that did happen.
Okay.
So as part of that acquisition, we got some amount of cash, some ownership, and we also got a small amount of royalty on the Sprout games that they acquired.
Right, because then they sort of got absorbed by PopCap, and then I did stuff for Feeding Frenzy 2 and so on. And so your catalog became part of our catalog, basically,
Yeah.
right?
And
Uh,
part of the whole acquisition, I was like, hey, Big Fish, they're offering us more money because that means that they value the games that they're buying more than PopCap does. So like, I want to be a PopCap. What if we just went back and said, hey, if these games sell more than X, then we get some participation because you're guessing they're going to do this. We're guessing they're going to do twice this or whatever. Instead of demanding our guess instead of your guess, let's just say if you're wrong, then like we'll get a little piece of the. And that was the deal that got us over the hump from the bigger cash payout up front
hmm,
and into Fourth and Battery.
nice.
That's awesome. And yeah, and I remember you came in hot too. You were like right in the middle of Talismania, and you had two guys, Del and Wes, working on it. And you were the producer on that game. Or did you write code on it also? At some point, you stopped writing code and you kind of went into more of a managerial position.
Yeah, so I was kind of the producer on that game because we're in this deal where we needed to make these games on a certain calendar for real networks. And we realized that we were just falling behind. And so we brought Dell and Wes in and said, hey, help us make good on our real networks deal and fill one of our slots. And so that's how they kind of came into the fold is to help us fill one of our slots, which was Talismania. It was their design. They kind of pitched us on Talismania. Dell was sort of game designer. Wes was programmer. They didn't really have a producer in the sense of like making hard product decisions. They were trying to make the game better and make the game better, but sort of the how do we actually kind of make this all a full game? Like, when are we going to get a sound designer? Like the sort of logistics side of producer they didn't have. And so I was kind of playing the logistics side of producer while Dell was playing kind of the game design side of producer. Development of that was it was a little painful.
I
I
remember,
think
yeah.
I think Wes left games after that
hmm
because it's a little bit of a pressure cooker. I wrote some code on Talismania. I wrote code on Feeding Frenzy 2, and I think those were the last two I wrote code for at PopCap.
hmm
Well, and so I'm very curious because now how what would first of all what would you say your like actual role slash job title was once you arrived at PopCap?
Confused.
Yeah.
Okay.
Senior
So,
confused.
like the parallels between PopCap and Sprout were good, and that put me in a really awkward position because I was Sprout's Jason, and PopCap had a Jason.
Right.
And where I fit relative to Jason was a really confusing thing to me and something I struggled with just sort of personally because I wanted to be Jason. I wasn't sure I was as good as Jason, but I wanted to be Jason, but I couldn't be Jason because Jason was Jason. Jason was in Vancouver. So he was remote and he was just this text-based presence across all creative at PopCap. And to me, that was really intimidating, because I'm actually a much more sort of in person kind of thing. And I'm like, I don't want to pretend like I'm Jason, but like does the company need another? So am I Jason too, or am I something different? And so it took me a while to figure out like, okay, like how can I make an impact at this company without butting heads with another creative director? Because we don't need two creative directors.
Well, so then, yeah, I mean, like, I'm almost thinking like, well, like producer at large, or you were there for a number of years, right? I mean, again, if you rolled in 2005, which I think is right, I
Yep.
think you showed up more or less within a couple of months of me, and you were there past the buyout. So that was, 6 or 7 or 8 years. Like at that time, if you had run into someone and told them what your job was, it would have been I'm a blank at PopCap. Would you have said, I'm an executive at PopCap? I'm a producer at PopCap? I'm a.
Yeah, so I started I hate titles. So I will say that I always kind of fought back when someone tried to give me a specific title because I'm like, yeah, but like I just want to do cool stuff.
But I do this other
And
thing too.
so like
Well,
people are like, but I got to know what to print on the business card. So what's your title? Or I need to know what to put on this presentation. So what I ended up with is I was a senior producer at PopCap when I first came in.
that makes sense.
So I finished the Sprout titles and then I bounced around trying to figure out what to do. For a little while, there was this ill-fated thing called the Daily Thing
I recall
or
that. Yep.
PopCap Daily.
Yep. I remembered making like, because that was supposed to be something like a daily newsletter that was also had like a bunch of little widgets and stuff because I did like drawings of like a dog with boxing gloves, and so just these like
Oh,
micro games that would
yep.
be included in this daily newsletter, as though people wanted to receive like a newsletter every day in their email and pop it open and do crossword puzzles and so on. But yeah, I recall that for
Yeah,
sure.
so I struggled with that for a little bit and then we thankfully killed it because it didn't turn out to be a great idea. But then part of where I saw a need was saying, hey, we had this one guy, Ethan, who was working
Mhm.
on a few ports of our games to Xbox. And I'm like, okay, number one, I know a whole bunch about developing on Xbox because I just came from this failed console game startup and we're doing an Xbox, PlayStation, dual platform AAA game. And number two, like there's so much more potential than just let's have one guy do a few things. So I started having a conversation with Dave Roberts and with Dave Haas. And I was like, hey, what if I helped like ramp up our efforts to get off of just being PC and build the business kind of sideways. So like Jason, creative director of Let's Go Make a New Game. Ed, okay, cool. Now let's bring that game everywhere. Like,
Hmm.
so I was able to
Totally
kind of
makes sense.
find
Yeah,
hey, there's sort of a leadership hole here where like we could be more ubiquitous in our games because they could translate really well. Maybe there's something that I can do there. And so that's the birth of the Fist team.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, we talked to MLJ about Fist.
And, I hired a little bit of a weird kind of misfit team. It was a really interesting group of people from very different backgrounds. And we went out, and it was our job to like represent PopCap as well as we think PopCap should be represented on platforms that weren't the traditional PC casual games platforms.
Now,
Mhm.
to my mind, this makes a lot of sense because I always sort of attributed it to Dave Roberts, his influence as saying, kind of, you guys just make the games and then I'll put them on everything that has a microchip on them, and if you make great games then we'll just put them on everything. But now I'm getting the sense that like at least if nothing else this aligns with that, and in fact it sort of sounds like you were kind of the point person on that whole policy of just go, we've got great games, so let's just get them on everything.
Yeah, so I do think Dave Roberts really sort of drove a lot of that business imperative, but then how we did it, there were lots of different ways we could do it. We could have completely outsourced it, but PopCap had already tried outsourcing a fair bit, and without really close oversight, it came back and we're like, what is this garbage? This doesn't feel like a PopCap game. Like, no,
Mhm. Mhm.
you missed how important, that sound is in Zuma or the timing of that. So they lost the spirit of the game in the port.
Mhm.
Well,
And
Mhm.
and
so
go
that
ahead.
was sort of where I came in. I was like, hey, let's create a team of people whose job it is to maintain the spirit. It's their job to understand the spirit and carry that forward.
And which is really huge for the especially the control schemes that existed in our games on PC and in getting that to actually translate on console. I mean, that's a huge lift, which was done successfully and impressively well.
And again, our MLJ episode, we talked to him in some detail about that specific element of like the Xbox PVZ port, right? About like getting nailing down like to my mind, controls are the most elementary aspect of a video game. Like the way that you interact with what is on screen is has to be right because if it's not, then nothing else can be good. If it feels bad to do the thing, then you're sunk. And so and yeah, like a game like Plants vs. Zombies, which is so natively about moving a mouse around and clicking on things versus, moving some kind of cursor or an insertion point around a screen with a joystick, you have to spend all the time to get that right.
Some other challenging platforms like the Nintendo DS, where you're dealing with a tiny, tiny screen, and like, how do you actually pick things that are, if you just scaled the whole interface down, then the the plants that you're picking are going to be 7 by 7 pixels large, and that's going to be way too small. So how do you like redo the graphic design of the game so that you can play it on
So
a small screen?
So this to me sounds like you're kind of downstream, like the game, as you described earlier. It's like Jason is the one to say, okay, we want a new game and it's going to be blah. And then we make this game. And then you're like a second order past the creation of the game and now putting it onto other things. But surely at the same time as like an executive, you're also present during all the conversations about like, say, we just released PVZ. We're going to do a PVZ 2, right? Like, how's that? Like, so you're also have a second hat, don't you, in terms of being a member of the executive that's making decisions about these like are how we are definitely going to make a PVZ 2. How are we going to do that kind of thing? So you're also in the room there, right?
So I started to be in the room for sure around that time because part of it is a lot of my decisions were you had a spreadsheet, right? Like we didn't make PVZ2 with a spreadsheet for how much does it cost. But PVZ2 for Xbox, we needed to decide how much it was worth to spend on bringing that to Xbox.
Right.
Before we did it, sometimes we were using outside developers, sometimes we were doing it in-house, but there were budgetary decisions being made as part of the green light process, as part of the building it out process. And like, it wasn't the let's throw some poker chips down on this next new game. It was the, okay, PVZ2 has this. Now, if we think Xbox is going to be plus 30%, let's not spend plus 40% making the plus 30% happen. Let's spend 10% plus 10% making the plus 30% happen. Kinds of calculus were being done, which meant that, yeah, I started getting a little bit more involved in the studio strategy as a whole because it was helping feed, I saw part of my job was to just be able to feed the new IP development in the studio enough money that they could go keep making their games without looking at a spreadsheet.
Right.
Like this part of the business needed to feed back in so that we could not worry about it when we're going to take an extra year on PVZ to get it right.
Well, and like from my perspective, and I think at least partially from Isaac's as well, like, we were both present as PVZ, the original PVZ was being developed by the team down in was it San Jose or whatever, plus Rich. And then it came out, and people often don't remember that it was not a gigantic hit right out of the box. It actually, I think it didn't really become a huge hit until the iPad version, when it shipped with the original iPad, and that's when PVZ really exploded. But then by that point, Isaac and I would have been sort of off on like either Prince, well, I would have been on Prince of Toys or eventually, what eventually became Peggle 2 after many, many nightmares. But the point I'm trying to get at here is that like for me, Plants vs. Zombies 2 is a very black box, sort of shrouded in mystery thing for years of like how it sort of came into being. And I think it went through like different iterations before it ever launched as what it eventually did launch as we now look at PVZ2 and go, okay, it is a mobile only game. There are no other versions of it on any other platform, including even the PC, mobile only. And then I came to it, some number of years after that from spending all this time on Peggle. So, so there's a lot of stuff about the genesis of PVZ2 that I'm super fuzzy on. Essentially, is what I'm trying to get at. So, any kind of insight you have into like, well, so what was that process of getting PVZ2 off the ground, getting it past like however many pivots needed to happen, and then finally releasing it in the form that it was finally released in? Any kind of insight you would have onto that whole process, I would be really interested in. And I think a number of our viewers would too, because I personally receive emails from people wanting to know like all the stuff about PVZ2.
Yeah, so PVZ2 I think is really interesting because it's almost like if you look at how PVZ2 happened, it's like the rings of the tree that explain a huge amount of change that happened at PopCap. And PVZ2 was sort of started at the beginning of a huge amount of change and released after a huge amount of change. Um, by the time PVZ2 released, I left the company.
Well, so now wait a minute. I'm trying to figure out the timeline here because so PVZ2 was in development at the time of the buyout, but it hadn't come out.
That's my
Okay,
memory
right,
of it.
right. Okay. So all right. So you left in between the gap between like PVZ2 is in development, EA buys PopCap, you leave, and then PVZ2 eventually comes out. Is that the correct sequence of events?
I believe that is correct. Yep,
So
Okay.
you were probably we might be jumping ahead a little bit here, but you stayed about a year after the buyout and then
about a
split.
year. Yep.
Yeah, because I was about 6 months, and I know that you last a little longer than I did. So okay, okay.
Well, can we, so then this might not be a bad idea to sort of dovetail back into one of your questions, Isaac, about the build up to the buyout and
Yeah, yeah. There was we had a lot of different projects going on. We were kind of siloing off it in different areas. As I understand it, when EA bought out PopCap, you suddenly became kind of like a director of studios worldwide or something. Like you definitely jumped into a different spot that was it seemed like a lot more pressure.
So that happened before the buyout. That happened
Mhm.
like a year and a half before the buyout.
Okay, yeah, build up
it would
then.
have
Um,
been, then you would have been in that position during the whole pig up like business, right?
yes, yes. And I do hope we get to talk a little bit about Pig Up.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
For me, the big change, right? Because the I was doing all these all downstream platforms, but then I was asked by Dave Roberts, "Hey, do you want to take over as head of studios?" And I'm like, "What?"
Gulp.
Um, and in part because the role of head of studios never really sat on one of the founders. It was always some other poor schlep who, when they gave it up, looked like they had been through a war. Sukbir was head of studios for a while. Dave Haas was head of studios for a while. It was a very weird place to be. And I was asked to be the next one.
From my perspective as a grunt in the trenches in previous podcasts, I would just sort of refer to it as like the star chamber. There's just this sort of fog of managerial executive type who just sort of have meetings all the time and argue about what they're going to do, and in a way that I didn't feel was especially effective, particularly because like you could end up with situations where like one no vote could shut things down. And I think like that group of executives probably became too large to be a good decision making group, maybe a better deliberative group, but not a great executive decision making kind of group. And I think a lot of decision making. I mean, this is all my speculation, just looking at it, and what from underneath the eye of Sauron kind of thing, and just going, I don't know, like the executive stratum at PopCap is not quite as nimble at making good decisions as I used to feel it was.
Well, yeah, and the transition of me into head of studios was weird because my first day as head of studios, I'm like, okay, can you tell me, like, give me the org chart? And we had been growing like crazy, right? Like we were doing mobile and iPad. We were doing mobile stuff in Ireland. We were doing a bunch of console stuff. We were doing iPad and iPhone stuff, which was independent of the mobile stuff. Plus, we had a bunch of new games in
But it
development.
wasn't like linear growth either. I mean, PopCap had already gone through these sort of growth contraction sort of things, right? So I think we were in one of our growth phases.
Yeah.
Go on.
Well, and then I was handed the org chart, and I'm like, okay, so who do all these people report to as manager? And I think the number was 118 of those people reported to me directly.
Oh boy.
Oh,
And with that, we're going to wrap up part one of our two-part interview with Ed Allard, senior producer at PopCap Games during the Golden Age. Isaac, anything you want to add?
only that it's been an exciting romp down memory lane from an executive's perspective and from the perspective of someone who's been deep in the industry for a long time. And it only gets better from here, so definitely tune in for the next episode. It's going to be awesome.
All right. And with that, this has been an episode of the Unofficial PopCap Podcast. Yeah!